Thank you everyone for joining us. So firstly, I'd like to introduce our two panelists or guest speakers, however you want to put it. First, we have Rabbi Kennard, who many of you probably know already, but is very involved in our community and is the principal of Mount Scopus and has been for quite a few years now. So thank you, Rabbi Kennard, for joining us. And then we also have Rabbi Ajzenszmidt, who is the Rabbi of Chabad on campus, very involved in Jewish life on universities and helps a lot of students in those areas. And this is in no way an exhaustive list of what both these men do. They're both very involved in the Melbourne Jewish community and do a lot for the people they help. So the way this is going to run is it is a panel, but we also want it to be a bit of a discussion. So Rabbi Kennard and Rabbi Ajzenszmidt, feel free to interject and follow up on what each other have said. And if anyone also, before we start, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. If they're relevant to what we've said, then we'll touch on them throughout the discussion. Otherwise, we'll come back to them at the end as additional questions for our panelists. And if it's directed at someone specific, then feel free to mention that in the chat. And yeah, so both of you are obviously educators, but you both work in very different environments, or you could say there are some similarities, but different age groups, different kinds of students. And the first thing we wanted to touch on is overall, what is your general approach to chinuch, and what do you think your role is as educators within your respective environments? And following on that, we wanted to know if you could share a small anecdote or story about interaction with where you felt you've had an impact on a student, or if you're too humble for that, you can talk about a moment where a teacher had an impact on you when you were a child, or even as an older person. So do one of you want to start, or should I choose? Rabbi Ajzenszmidt?
Okay, so the first part was the perspective, right?
Yeah.
First of all, it's great to see so many faces I haven't seen in a very long time. Second of all, if nobody's met me, I'd love to meet you in the future when we get to campus, or if you need any help rescheduling exams or whatever there is because of all the chagim. So my work on campus, I try to work with everybody, and I meet with orges regularly. I'm sure there's some people here who are very involved in orges. And the first question orges had for us when we met with them was, so Chabad is here to take care of the religious students, and orges is here to take care of the rest. And I said, no, you got it all wrong. I said, maybe Chabad is here less for the religious students than they are for the non-religious students. Not to say, God forbid, we wouldn't take care of anybody, but Chabad doesn't do what we do just to take care of our own people. You know, we're not here for ourselves. And so the approach of Ahavat Yisrael, which I could say we can let it out of the bag, that's probably the biggest driving force behind what we do, is not to get people to join our club. I'm not trying to make people Chabad. I'm not trying to make people think the way I do and dress the way I do. I'm trying to provide opportunities for people to connect to God. And I'm sure we'll discuss this throughout tonight, what that means and how we go about it. But an anecdote that might help explain that. So 3 years ago, my wife and I relocated from Hong Kong to Australia. We were shluchim in Hong Kong for 6 years in a very remote community near the airport. And when we moved to Melbourne, we didn't know what we were going to do. And a few months, or within a few months, we were offered the position to become to be the directors of Chabad campus and to work at universities. And there wasn't really a formal handover because the rabbi before us had already left a few months before. And so I was just told, yeah, just go there, go to Melbourne University, set up a table, the Jews will come. And for the first year, they didn't come. For the first year, maybe 2 or 3 came. But I stood out there every week, and there was one or 2 weeks where only 1 or 2 came, and it was difficult. Thank God, before COVID, we were having 50 or 60 at Melbourne University for a kosher lunch. But there was 1 week I was standing there, and I was just looking and anyone to try to make eye contact and see if anyone will take a double look. There's a rabbi standing in the middle of the South lawn at Melbourne University. Is this going to raise anyone's eyebrows? And it did. One student looked at me and we kind of locked eyes. And so she like started walking over to me, and I like tried to encourage her to come over to the table and come say hello. And without getting into too many details, because the student is still active on campus, she told me that she herself is not involved in any Judaism, but her brother goes to yeshiva. She went to McKinnon, but her brother later on joined yeshiva. So the next day, anyway, I invited her for Shabbos and she accepted. And the next day, her brother finds me at yeshiva at the school and comes over to him, and he's beyond so excited. He told me that I've been trying to get my sister involved, try to get her to come to shul, try to get her to come to a Shabbos dinner, to anything. And she doesn't feel that Judaism is very inclusive, and she doesn't feel that she doesn't connect with it. She wasn't dating a non-Jew at the time. And she never accepted an invitation. But me being on campus was a non-threatening way to invite her, to get her involved, and she accepted. Fast forward, she's gone to study in Israel, she's back at uni, and it's a journey. But I could say that's one example of me standing on campus, not knowing who and how I'm going to help somebody, but they feel more welcome to come to me on their turf, on their grounds, where they're comfortable, than coming to a shul or coming to a Chabad house or going into a rabbi's home and trying to connect there. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. I think I've forgotten what the question was, but I think it started with what is the nature of my role and how does Kennard sort of permeate through that?
Yeah.
So the nature of the role of a principal is very interesting, and I love the job that I've got, and I'm very thankful that I have it. It's a lot of administration, it's a lot of management, it's a lot of putting pegs into holes, and a lot of things which don't seem to directly impact on the students. But they're things that have to be done, and if they're done well, then the school functions well and the students benefit. But what a principal can do in addition to that is set a tone for a school. He or she can define what are the key points of its mission and vision and ensure that those things are developed. And the principal can do this in two ways, and the principal should do this in two ways. One is in a sort of indirect way, by the people whom he or she appoint and the resources that he or she divert to that area of the school. Mount Scopus, the school of which I'm privileged to be the head, has always had a very strong emphasis on Jewish education and Jewish identity. I don't claim any credit for creating that emphasis because it predated me by a long, long time. But I have been in a position to ensure that that emphasis is emphasized, but that is a focus, that really good people are appointed to further the key mission of the school, which is to promote the Jewish identity and the Jewish connection of its students, not necessarily to make them frum, although there's no secret, but I'm delighted if that would be a result, but to make them more connected to Jewish life and to Jewish practice and to Jewish knowledge. And the other way that the principal can do that is by setting the example themselves. And it's a little bit awkward for me to say this because it sounds very immodest, but I think it's an important answer to the question that the role of a principal, particularly of a school with a particular ethos, which some schools have more than others, is to embody that ethos and to be a living example of that ethos to the students. And I think that then impacts on the students again in the two ways. One, in a very general sort of distant way, that the kids know that there's somebody who's the principal and you can perhaps see what sort of person he is. But what really delights me in my job is when I make a personal connection with students, particularly older students, and sometimes those connections carry on long after they've graduated. I count 4 graduates on this Zoom call at the moment, and I'm very proud of each one of them. So if you know who you are, I can tell you I'm very proud of each of you, and I'm very proud of how you've taken what I think Scopus has given you and then driven it much, much further. And I'll pay tribute to B'nai Akiva here, because in case of all 4 of you, I think B'nai Akiva's played a huge part in that as well. A student recently wrote to me, over Rosh Hashanah, he sent me a very, very nice greeting, and he said, was his role model, which I was very, very flattered by. Unfortunately, he spelled it Rollmodle, so there's still work to be done in terms of the education sphere. But he's a great lad, a really, really great lad. Anecdote. One of the highlights of my week is I run a Gemara share after school. And for kids who generally haven't learned Gemara before, Gemara is not a major part of our curriculum, but I wanted to find an opportunity to give a concentrated Gemara share. So I have a small group twice a week, once from year 9 and once from years 10 to 12. And what really delights me is how excited they are to be part of the shir. And they come after school, and there's no credit and there's no food. They just come because they want to learn. And I was particularly excited to see the, it's not quite a yearbook, but a sort of yearbook that the year 12 kids have just produced, where they each say a line, which I think is supposed to be funny, and probably some jokes that I don't get, which is probably quite good, associated with their picture. But one of the students, who is a top student in my Gemara class, the line that he chose, when everybody else is choosing funny comments or vulgar comments or whatever, the line that he chose was, "Hamotzi lechavero ala haraya," which is a classic quote from the Gemara, and I was very, very proud by that. But let me just end by, more importantly, you asked perhaps a story about a teacher who influenced me. So I was quite moved a few weeks ago by the passing of a great teacher of mine, who was the manager of the youth group that I was part of when I was young, a long, long time ago, which made a huge impact on me. The youth group did, and this particular individual, he was called Bobby Hill. He was never known as rabbi or anything. I don't think he actually was a rabbi, but he certainly could have been. And he showed me, by talking about it, but much more by demonstrating it, the role of learning, of Torah learning in a committed Jewish life. And I learned a huge number of things from him, and to this day I'm still very inspired by what I learned from him. But in particular, I learned from him through his personal example of the importance of learning. And that, to me, is a teacher. A teacher is somebody who can convey not just knowledge, that is important, but it's not the most important, but values and commitment to their students, usually by personal example. Okay, that's the end of my answer.
Thank you. I think that very much relates to us as Madrichim. We're always talking about dogma and how we can set the best example for our Chanichim. So thank you for that. So the topic that we advertised for tonight is, to what extent are we responsible for other people's connection to God? Now, as Bnei Akiva, as a community organization, we obviously have a big focus on community and caring for one another. Yet this time of year, specifically with Yom Kippur coming up, we know often has a greater focus on oneself and how we can better ourselves for the following year. And there's a lot of focus on our personal journey within Judaism. So we wanted to explore this kind of balance that exists both within our specific organization of Bnei Akiva, but also within Judaism as a whole, of how much responsibility do we have for the connection of other people versus our own personal connection. And maybe they're not contradictory, like they can both exist together. So the next question, I guess, is what extent, so, sorry, let me rephrase that. So that's what we're going to try get through within this discussion. But a specific question we want to ask is, a term that gets thrown around a lot, especially in our community, is the word derech, like going off the derech, staying on the derech, which literally translates to the word path, but is often talking about like your Jewish journey. So what does this word and this phrase mean to you two individually?
I suppose it's my turn to start. But there are a lot of questions there again. Can you go back to like the first question, the first part?
Sorry, that was a bit unclear. The first part was just explaining to everyone what the topic is going to be about. Right. And then the question we want to ask is about the derech.
And what does derech mean to us? Okay, well, I don't know if I've got much to add. In today's parlance, it's often part of the phrase off the derech. Although some people actually these days are talking about on the derech, which I think is quite exciting pedagogical development. People talk about off the derech. The derech is the Jewish way, or let's call it the halachic way, or the way of living a life in accordance with the value of Torah and mitzvahs. a life which is committed to doing the right thing as defined by the Shulchan Aruch. That I think is the derech. These days we are very, very aware of the phenomenon of people going off the derech. In other words, they come from a religious background, from a halachically observant background, and they move away from that, sometimes in a spirit of defiant rejection, more often in a spirit of just drifting away. So off the derech, I don't know if I'm answering the right question, but I'll carry on. Off the derech is referring to this particular phenomenon of people who came from a religious family and have left that lifestyle to a smaller or a greater extent. And I would say it is a huge challenge for us today. It's if you like, another part of Kiruv. Kiruv Rechokim is very important, but just by the way, in answer to the question of the title of the panel, it is a chiyuv, it is an obligation. Kiruv Kurovim, bringing near those who are near already, is also a very important obligation and a very important educational mission, particularly in today's world. There are very few families, including my own, that have not been affected by members of the family going off the derech. And we have to look very long and hard about why this is happening. What are we as parents and educators failing to do? And how can we remedy that? So that's what off the derech means. The derech is the way that the Torah thinks that we should lead. Now, I'll just end with this point. I think it's very significant that we talk about a derech, a journey from A to B, or maybe a journey from A to Z, passing through lots of stations on the way. The word halacha, usually translated as law, actually means going. It also has the idea of a movement. And I think at this time of year, it's very important to appreciate that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of us is not to, or what we're judged by, is not how far we have come, but the direction in which we are going. I used to be a maths teacher, so I would say it's not just the Y value, but it's the derivative that is of interest. It's the direction in which we are going. Because it's important that everyone feels that they are on a derech, on a journey, that they never feel that they have made it, that they have got to the destination, because the destination, which is shlema, which is perfection, is always beyond our reach. So we're always on a derech. Let me just end with one-line story. I'm reminded of the story of somebody who said to the Boston Rebbe, so I don't know which Boston Rebbe, I don't know when, but never mind, it's a good story. He said, by introducing himself, he just wanted to make clear where he came from. And he said to the Rebbe, you've got to understand, I'm not a Baal Teshuva. And the Rebbe said, why not? And I like that story. And I'll stop talking there.
Thank you. Rabbi Ajzenszmidt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, with all the respect and without, God forbid, I'll share the Chabad approach, maybe, which will shed a little bit of light on a different side of. I think the derech word to me sounds a little bit dirty, or a little bit. Of course, everyone needs to serve Hashem, and everyone needs to and everyone has a derech. There's derech eretz. There's all types of drachim that we need to be careful about. But I'll just touch upon the idea that I would say, and again back to the previous question of someone that was a role model. I could say Lubavitch Rabbi, especially in the work that I do, would be my role model. And just a story to illustrate. Just the way Chabad would approach this is that there was two yeshiva students who were sent to an island called Curacao. It's one of the Caribbean islands, and when they were sent there, they didn't know exactly what they're doing there, but they went to meet Jews. And while they were meeting Jews, one such Jew, his name's Chaim Grossman, he was explaining an issue he was having with the school. Basically, there's no Jewish school in Curacao, and his son, his name is Eli, he's approaching bar mitzvah, and the school is Catholic, and the school has mandatory church services, part of the class, but the principal at the time was okay with Eli skipping the church services. However, a new principal arrived, and he was a devout Catholic, and he made the services mandatory. So what ended up happening was there was a kind of a tug of war, and in the end the boy left the school. And this caused a lot of issues within the general population of Curacao. The Jewish community always got along very well with the neighbors. And even within the Jewish community, some people thought that this was a little bit extreme, to not let your child go to church and then you would take your kid out of the school. And so this family were really dealing with this, and it was very difficult. So these two students realized that this was the reason the Rebbe sent them, was to give this family some chizuk, some strength, that they'll be okay. And they ended up inviting this family to visit New York for Purim. And they spent some time in New York, and they met with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he gave them a lot of chizuk as well. And they ended up going back, and they sent a letter to one of the yeshiva students with a sub-letter to be passed on to the Rebbe. Just a note, and it said, from a small Jew in Curacao, who was given a lot of strength from this time spent in New York. And the Rebbe wrote back to him that I have to take objection with the words "a small Jew," because we all come from Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. There's no such thing as a small Jew. Everybody is a big Jew. So the first thing is, we don't like the word kiruv v'chokim, because who's far and who's close to God? It could be somebody who's dressed not like a religious person, but they're much closer to God than we are. We don't know what's going on between everyone's relationship with God. I think it's very difficult to say. So they're no longer dressing the way we do. They're no longer acting the way we do, but they could still be on a connected path that's higher. And on the other side, by saying we're doing kiruv v'chokim, then we're saying I'm close to God. I'm going to bring you with me, and I'm going to bring you to God. So Chabad doesn't like that word kiruv v'chokim, or that phrase. But at the same time, I agree with Rabbi Kennard. We're trying to encourage everyone to grow, and to reach a level of tzaddik is mostly out of most of our reaches. But we can work and to continuously grow, and a Baal Tshuva can reach even higher than a tzaddik. So it's definitely worth trying to be a Baal Tshuva.
Thank you. So we've got a question in the chat, which I think actually relates to both of what you just said, not just Rabbi Kennard. So Simon Weinstein said, perhaps the reason that people go off the derech is that perfection is beyond reach. And Rabbi Ajzenszmidt, you also just related to that when you said that being a tzaddik is beyond most of our reach. So sometimes it's hard to start on a journey when you know that there is no end. It kind of makes it harder when you think that this is continuous and I can never reach that top level. So how do you think we can combat that, both as educators and as individuals who are also striving for that?
I'll start. I'll let Rabbi Kennard finish. First, you can learn Tanya. Tanya is a great place. It's called Sefer Shel Benonim, and it explains the whole struggle and the purpose of people in this world is to reach the level of Benoni. And I could give a 6-week course that I did earlier this year on it, and people study Tanya their whole lives, and they still have more to learn. But the idea is that we're here in this world to accomplish something. And most people in this world do not reach perfection in any field in their lives. The best artist still has room for improvement, and so does a scientist 100 years ago thought that every major discovery was made. Little do they know, fast forward 100 years, and they'd be surprised they wouldn't recognize the world that they live in. So there's always room to grow. There's always more to do. Nobody reaches. If we're not going up, we're going down. So I think there's always plenty to grow in. So there's no reason to give up, just like you wouldn't give up running the marathon if you can't reach. I'll just share a tiny anecdote. There was in Mount Everest, the first person to climb Mount Everest, I think it was named Sir, maybe Rav Kennard knows him, he recognizes his name, Sir Attenborough or something, from England. He was trying to climb Mount Everest. And basically what happened was he came back, and they had a whole big event for him. And he unfortunately failed. So at this event that was prepared for him, he said, he turned to a picture of Mount Everest behind him, and he said, you might have beaten me this time, but next time I'll beat you, because I'm still growing. Mount Everest has stopped growing. It's not going to get any bigger. But I have room to grow. I have room to get bigger, and I'll eventually be able to. And later on, he did climb Mount Everest.
Okay, I'll thank Simon for the question, and David for his comment on the question. And Rabbi Steiner, if I can ask you to put your comment in again, but without Hebrew letters on your keyboard. I think that's needs to be fixed there. Simon, I don't agree with the premise of your question. And as Rabbi Mendy said, in most professional or artistic lives, people are always striving to get better. The greatest pianist doesn't say, well, I can't ever reach the ultimate, that's why I keep practicing 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and therefore I won't even try. And that applies to the greatest pianist. It applies to, I think, many people in professions. In my own profession, I think the best teachers are the ones who are always striving to be better teachers. And I don't think that's a reason really to put people off. And I think, you know, when I said that shleimut, that perfection is something that we can never achieve, and that's why we're always on a derech, on a journey. That, to be honest, is more of a theological point. And I don't think that those who go off the derech grapple with that particular theological, philosophical idea. I think they go off the derech for much more immediate and personal, and if you like, less sophisticated reasons, which perhaps we can talk about, or perhaps that's not the scope tonight. So to be honest, I think the fact that we can never say that we have achieved the ultimate is not a something that puts us off leading a more committed lifestyle, but on the contrary, it makes it more attractive because it means there's always further challenges. There's always more to achieve. So that's how I respond to that comment.
Thank you. So the next question goes a bit back to what you said earlier, Rabbi Kennard. So again, about this idea of perfection and relating it to being role models. So as educators, we're obviously not perfect. As madrichim, we're still very young, obviously still learning our way in this world and within Judaism. So how can we educate our chanichim to grow up to be great, orthodox, observant, and have this strong connection to God when we're still grappling with these things ourselves and not come off as hypocrites?
Wow, that's a very important question. It's a huge question. May I just give a plug for the role of madrichim and madrichot? I think you're all fantastic people. I think the time that you dedicate to serving your chanichim, I know you do it partly because you have fun and you like being part of a group, and you like doing things together, but ultimately you're giving up hours and hours and hours of your week in preparing and then delivering the tochniot for the sake of your chanichim, and I think it's truly admirable. But I also want to say it's truly awesome, and I use awesome in the correct sense, not in the teenager sense, of being full of awe, of yira, because whereas one expertly crafted word, or even one just accidental word, can change a chanich's life for the better, so one word, one example, one mode of behavior can change a chanich's life in the other direction as well. And that's why the role of being a madrich, madricha is really awesome. There is awe, yira, fear involved. But I think I'll try and answer your question in two ways. Having said it's very hard and very serious and a lot's at stake, I'll say two things. Number one, the last word you said, I must take issue with. You said, how can we come across not being hypocrites? Now, what is a hypocrite in a religious sense? So, and I learned this from Rav Riskin, but I've seen it in other places as well. A religious person is somebody, as we said earlier, who strives to be, let's put it, as closer to Hashem than one is already. You can find sort of proxy indicators for that closeness by how much of halakha they are particular about and how much time they spend on Torah and mitzvahs. There are various indicators. And we should always be wanting to be at a higher level than where we are now. So wherever we are now, we should be aware that where we are now is not where we should be, because we should be somewhere closer. That doesn't make us a hypocrite. On the contrary, that means we have a yearning to be closer to Hashem than we are now. That is the most healthy of dispositions for a religious person. So to say, I'm here, but I really know I should be here, and I'm going to try to get there, that's the best example that we can show. Now, there is a different type of attitude, which is hypocrisy, that says, I'm going to pronounce X, Y, Z, but as soon as nobody's looking, I'm going to do A, B, C, which is completely different. That the message I give is completely different from what I really believe and what I really do. That's hypocrisy. That is the worst type of chinuch. And I mean the worst type of chinuch because it teaches our chanichim that none of this really matters, that none of this is true, that none of this is really worth striving for. And of course, today, on social media, we're never out of sight. And I know it's a huge challenge, and it's a challenge for madrichim and madrichot, who have to be aware that every picture on Facebook can be seen by their chanichim. In truth, there's never a moment when they're out of sight. And therefore, it becomes very hard to always live up to this ideal. But what I'm trying to say is, there's no shame whatsoever in saying to a chanich, I am here, but ideally I should be there. And Amit Hashem, perhaps over the next year, between this Rosh Hashanah and next year, I'll make some progress that way. There is no shame in that whatsoever. On the contrary, that is a very, very positive message to give to a chanich. However, if you say one thing and then do completely the opposite, then the chanich will see through that straight away. And that is what one has to avoid. And therefore, to sum up, I would say the answer to your question ultimately is, if you want to be a madrich, then make sure that you've got the personal integrity and the commitment to the ideals of the movement, which are the ideals of Torah. And if you haven't got that commitment, doesn't mean you have to be there. You could be there, but you have to have that commitment. If you don't have that, then perhaps the role of hadricha is not the right role for you. Mendy.
I'll just add that the Lubavitch Rebbe used to teach that if you know an aleph, you can teach an aleph. You don't need to know bet before you start teaching aleph. You don't need to know the whole Torah before you start teaching. Know something well and teach it and teach that over. I won't argue with Rabbi Kennard's point about how we behave, and obviously we should try to be upstanding and leaders. I have a nice story, but maybe I'll save that for the end, which might tie into this.
Sorry, just had to find my mute button. Thank you. I think that's very helpful as madrichim to learn that. So now, I guess, onto the crux of the topic. So how responsible are we for other people's, not necessarily observance, not their knowledge, but their connection to God? Is it our responsibility to find those people who don't have a connection and help them find that connection? Or are we fulfilled in finding our own connection and the people that are already within our organization? How important is it that we find those other people and help them find their connection? Rabbi Ajzenszmidt, if you want to start with this one.
Okay, so it's a very good question. I don't want to get too elaborate. I'll just mention a few points. First of all, if we look at the story of Purim, and we see that Mordechai is trying to convince Esther to speak to Achashverosh and put her life at risk, and he gives multiple arguments to Esther. But one of the arguments is quite interesting, because Mordechai tells Esther that if you don't do it, Hashem will find someone else to do it. And the question is, what type of inspiration is that to tell somebody, go do something, and if you're not going to do it, God will find someone else? Because at the end of the day, this was Esther's purpose. This was a job that Esther had to do. And if she lost the opportunity, then her mission, her purpose in this world was not fulfilled. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches that a neshama comes into this world for 70 or 80 years just to do one favor for another person. And to give up the opportunity, is quite a waste. And to quote Rav Kook, who says that until I was created, there was nothing in the world that needed me. But when I was created, the time had come for me to accomplish something that needed to be done in existence. So we all have a purpose. We all have something to do in this world. We all have a reason. So the question shouldn't be, how much do I have to do? The question is, what can I do? How can I fulfill my purpose? How can I do what I need to do? How can I live in this world? And everybody has a different skill. Everyone has a different environment that they're in. Everyone has different opportunities. They know different people. So to say, well, my job is only the students at Bnei Akiva and anyone else, it's too bad. It could be that you have family. It could be you have a connection. It could be that there's a student in your class at university that you're the only one, you're the only Jewish person that they're meeting. You're the first Jew and the only Jew that they'll meet. And so that's an opportunity that God put you in this world to give that up and to say, oh, it's not my problem. So it's a very difficult decision to make. So I would say if whatever we can do to help another Jew, number one. Number two is we should never pass up an opportunity that we have. So we should never say, well, I'm sorry, this is out of my jurisdiction. I'm not going to go and help you now. I can't offer you. How much you can take on and all that, that's something you can discuss with your, what we call mashpia. Everyone needs to have a mentor, someone that they can look up to and discuss these things and find out what's the best balance for them. But I would be very careful to say that my responsibility ends at this line. And right, if there's a house on fire, you wouldn't say, well, it's not convenient for me to run into the house and save the people that are sleeping in it, right? We Avos Yisrael doesn't have a limit. There's no limit that we say, okay, my responsibility ends here. I've done all that I have to do. Even Hillel said that to run in front of a horse and to clear the way for someone who used to be wealthy and lost that, that's considered Avos Yisrael. We don't make the decision, okay, that's enough for you, and then obviously you don't want to burn out. Obviously we want to do it in a healthy way. But I would be very careful to say my responsibility ends and you're on your own from here.
Well, I don't have much to disagree with. We all have a responsibility. It's a halachic responsibility to look after the spiritual lives of others. We have a mitzvah of to rebuke one's fellow if they're doing the wrong thing, which is part of helping them do the right thing. We have a concept of a revut, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zel Lezer, which has halachic ramifications, which means my mitzvah is not fully done until everybody else has done the mitzvah. I think if I can just add, I think perhaps the question can be phrased as, should we put other people's spiritual growth ahead of our own? And I'm not going to answer this because I'll tell you now, I'm going to say that it depends on every individual and a halachic expert should be consulted. But for instance, should I move myself and my family out of a neighborhood where there is a lot of chizuk and a lot going on that helps me and my family to grow? Should I take myself out of that, put myself far away, removed from the Jewish centers in order to have some sort of influence on people there far away? I don't always agree with everything Chabad does, but I do pay credit to those Chabadniks who are the people who will go to far-flung communities and they will look after their family there away from the Jewish centers. That is a sort of question which is a halachic question. Should I risk either, God forbid, negative influences on me and my family, or even the opportunity cost? Should I forsake the opportunities for them to grow in a concentrated Jewish area if I move out of that area? That is a question that each individual needs to ask and needs to make a cheshbon and needs to consult with a halachic authority to help them. Another example is, should I spend a lot of time on helping others at the detriment of my own learning? Or to put it another way, obviously the answer is one should spend some time. The question is, where's the balance? Is it 90-10? Is it 10-90? And that will also vary from person to person and one's own situation, and what one would achieve in the 90 and what one would achieve in the 10. So there is no doubt whatsoever, and that's why the question, if I may say, of the panel is a little bit sterile. There is no doubt that we have obligations, we have tremendous obligations to look after the spiritual growth of every other Jew as well as ourselves. I think where it gets into, I find it interesting, halachic questions and real halachic questions, is where is the balance between looking after somebody else's growth and ensuring one's own growth, or facilitating one's own growth and that of one's family. And those are questions, and they're real questions, and they need to be addressed on an individual basis by a halachic expert.
Can I add also? I agree. Again, I agree. Just two points that I'd like to add. One is there was once a rabbi who approached the Rabbi. He said the Rabbi had sent him on shlichut to a faraway area, and the rabbi said that I'm not well and I have a disease which is debilitating. I need to be relieved from my shlichut. I need to be relieved from the job you've given me. The Rabbi said, wouldn't it be easier to be asked to be relieved of the illness so that you can focus on your shlichut? So obviously we all have troubles. We all have things that we have to say, or I have to make the the decision, where am I going to focus my attention? But it's a different way of focusing the attention on what's more important. But to say, there's a halacha that we learn in smicha, when it comes to salting meat or salting chicken. If you're salting the meat and the blood is coming out of the meat, but the salt is still there, the question is the blood re-entering the meat, or is the blood considered expelled from the meat? And there's an interesting discussion. And the answer is that if it's busy expelling the blood, it's not going to be absorbing the blood again. And the Rabbi gives this as an example for our lives. If we're busy in our lives influencing other people, and we go to areas where there could be a counter-influence, there are many places that I've been throughout Asia and around the world where there's a lot of negative influence, and it's very hard to imagine having a Jewish community in some places. But if we're busy inspiring other people, we're busy influencing other people, expelling our influence, then we won't be absorbing the outside influences. So we have to have the focus on inspiring others and not absorbing the things which are in their world.
Thank you. Now to get a bit more practical, we've spoken a lot about theoretically what we think is the right way to go about this, but in terms of practicality, so we know there are numerous ways to engage and seek out members of the broader Melbourne Jewish community. And perhaps this is something Chabad is kind of known for being able to reach those outer parts of the Jewish community. But even within our smaller group of the community, what do you think is the best way to reach out to those people? They don't have to be so far away, but the people within our community who might not be able to find their connection. How do you think is the best way for us to go about it as Madrachim in kind of bringing them into the fold and helping them strengthen their connection? So Rabbi Kennard, if you want to start this one.
Well, I'm going to say the question cannot be answered because there is no best way, because it varies absolutely from person to person. There are some people who are attracted by, let's say, music, Jewish music. There are some people who are attracted by, trying to think of another example before I get to the next one. Okay, I can't think of a middle one, but there are some people who are attracted by learning Torah, even as an intellectual exercise, and how much more so, hopefully, as a spiritual exercise or a combination of the two. There are some people who are attracted just by personal contact. There are some people who are attracted by being invited into a house for a Shabbos meal. There are some people who are attracted by somebody just showing that they care and they're prepared to give them time and they're prepared to help them. So there are, or any combination of the above. So I think the wonderful thing about the world of Kiruv is that different people who work in, let's call it the world of Kiruv, if you will pardon the expression, do it in all sorts of different ways. There is no archetype of Kiruv worker, and what is successful for one person will not be successful for another, and in a different milieu, dealing with a different group of people. I know, for instance, what I'm good at, relatively so. I know what I'm not good at, and there are certain things that I concentrate on in when I'm interacting with other people, and there are certain things that I know are not my strength. And that's fine, because those things are taken up by other people who do other things better than I do. So I'm taking a long way to say, but I think it's an important response to your question. There is no best way. Or to put it another way, the best way is whatever works for one individual. For that individual, that is the best way. If something can be done that brings them back to more connection to Jewish life and to Jewish learning and to Jewish practice, and ultimately to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then that's the best way for them. So there is no best way, and we need a symphony. We need lots of different parts of the orchestra playing at the same time in beautiful harmony to achieve the result that we want. There is no one way that works.
Rabbi Ajzenszmidt, do you have anything to add? Or are you in full agreement on this one?
I definitely agree. My question is, are you talking about as an organization or as individuals?
Well, I think both.
Well, I'm not going to critique, God forbid, Bnei Akiva. I think you guys do amazing work. And I know firsthand that many students who didn't go to Yavna or Mount Scopus, who are actively involved today in Bnei Akiva as Madrachim, it's due to so already people are, a lot of the madrichim are reaching out into the networks and getting people or young Jews involved in B'nai who didn't grow up in this situation. So you're already doing something right. I believe it's probably personal connections is probably the best way to do it, is instead of saying as an organization, we are now targeting anyone that went to McKinnon. I think that's a scary thought for people to hear, but as young Jewish people, getting people who you play in Ajax or Maccabi or whatever sports or whatever activities you're involved in, I'm sure you meet many Jews and you have neighbors who are involved. Invite them, bring them for a session or something like this, which is not, they don't have to sign up a 3-year contract with B'nai, but they can come for a one-off program, something small, and then you never know where that might go. So again, small steps, small connections, letting them know that they're welcome, that this is not a private club for people who went to B'nai as children and can get involved in B'nai today. So being an open organization, being welcoming, and connecting to your networks, to each madrich, connecting to their networks and inviting their friends.
Can I just give another answer, which will totally contradict the previous answer, but it's my privilege.
Sure.
You said, what's the best way? So a moment ago, I said there is no best way, but actually there is. And that is if people show that they care about other people. And not just about their frumkeit, not just about how they're keeping Shabbos, but they care about the person. And to put it another way, from the point of view of the one who is being influenced, the contact with a person who cares about them in a non-judgmental way is probably the best way in answer to your question. It probably achieves more than anything else. So in all of us here, certainly Mendy, myself in different ways, and all the madrichim here, they're in the business of connecting to people. And by far the best way to connect to people is to genuinely care about people, not to pretend to care, and not to focus, as I said, on their frumkeit, but to care about them. And if you want to be the most successful mashpia, the most successful influencer, and I don't mean in the YouTube sense, then show that you care.
I'll contradict. You can also be on the YouTube sense as well. There's a role in there too.
Thank you both very much. Before we wrap up, I know there are a few questions from people who have been listening. So we're going to open it up to a couple questions and then we'll wrap it up. So if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Rob and Mendy. I've got a question that I know that B'nai Akiva has been tackling with in the past, and as well as our communities, is when we have limited resources in time and money, like where should we be placing our focus? Should it be on kiruv or should it be on chizuk? Because there's only a certain amount of time that us as madrichim can focus on, and the community can focus on, and resource-wise, because we can't put all our resources in two baskets. So what's the best way to kind of find an equilibrium in that sense?
It's your turn to start.
Okay, so I'll use the story I was saving. There was a Dr. Shlomo Eckstein. He's the former professor of Bar-Ilan University. He shares a story which is printed, I can share with you the link if you want to read the full story. But in 1954, he's 91 or 92 years old already today. But in 1954, he was a madrich in B'nai Akiva in Mexico. And there were 20 madrichim. They went to visit New York. And while they're in New York, they had an audience with Lubavitch Rabbi. And he came with a similar question, maybe not as dire as Saul's question, but the question is, many of the students who get involved in B'nai, they end up leaving the organization. They also end up leaving the community. They're not so involved, and many end up intermarrying. And it was quite devastating for them. They're trying to build a community, trying to get students involved, get the children involved. At the same time, they don't feel like they're necessarily doing where should their focus be? What should they be doing? And the Rebbe gave them a beautiful answer, which I'll share with you. It says in Tehillim, Hazarim b'dima barina yikteru. Like Rav Kennard said, if you sow with love, with tears, right, you'll reap with song. If you come and you care and you share out of love, right? In Jewish education specifically, when we want to share the light and warmth of Judaism, we have to do so with our whole heart. And the Rebbe shared a story, and I'm not sure if this is specific to Mexico, but it illustrates what we're doing. A boy walks into Bnei Akiva, walks past the shul where Bnei Akiva is going on a Shabbos afternoon, and he comes and sits down. And the Madrich wants to welcome him. He's never seen this boy before, but doesn't have a chance because he doesn't want to start the story, what he's talking about from the beginning again. And so before he's explaining, he's telling a story about Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and he's talking about where we come from as Jews. And before he finishes, the boy's walked off. He's left the shul, and he never had a chance to meet him, to invite him back for another week, and he never sees him again. This boy grows up, goes to university, meets a non-Jewish girl, gets engaged, and he's going to get married. And the wedding's going to be in the church, and he's on the way to the church, and he sees the giant cross on top of the church, and he doesn't know where, and he doesn't know when, but he remembers hearing that he comes from this line of Jews, from Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and this is a long line that's been passed on from generation to generation. And he remembers that it's our job, like he heard, to continue this tradition. And this is the only reason why the Jewish nation has continued to survive. So how can he erase it? And he ends up calling off the wedding. Right? The boy doesn't know where he heard it or when he heard it, and the madrich that said it doesn't know what happened with this boy. And this is how life is. We don't know necessarily these things that we do, whatever it is that we're doing, we don't know the effect it will have on somebody in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years from now. But we need to do our best to connect, do it with love, do it with concern, do it with warmth, and do it as best as we can. And we will sometimes we will get to know, and the best is when we do get to see the fruits of our labor. But sometimes we never see the harvest, but there will be a harvest. If we do it with warmth and with love, there'll be a harvest. There'll be something that will come down the line. And this is what gave them tremendous chizuk when they went back to Mexico. Some of them were there for 2 to 3 years in the shlichut, but they were able to do it knowing that they might never know, but there will be something to harvest in the end. So Saul, to answer your question, I don't know if there's specific something you have to do differently. Maybe you're doing the right thing, maybe just not seeing the results. And that's okay. We don't always get to see the results of our labor. But there always are results. We don't know what they are. I'll let Rav Kennard, I'm sure he has something to share.
Thank you. So Saul asked about if one has not enough resources to work on what you call both kiruv and chizuk, how should you apportion the resources? I'm not going to be able to give an answer for a reason I'll say in a moment, but I don't, again, entirely agree with the premise of the question. I don't think it's strictly a binary choice, because I think there's always some room to do both. And I also think there's not really a distinction necessary between the two. There is very much a continuum between the two. And what is chizuk in one respect, I guess that's sort of a different way of referring to what I use the phrase kiruv karovim as opposed to kiruv rechokim. Whether we like that phrase or not, but I think it gives us a frame of reference. But the truth is, I can't answer the way you phrased the question because they are both vital. And I think different organizations, as I said earlier, different people and different organizations, their strengths are in different directions, different parts of this magnificent symphony that we're all contributing to. And there are some organizations which are more focused on, to use your words, kiruv, and some more focused on chizuk, and they are both important. We do need to reach out to the unaffiliated and give them good reasons for connecting or reconnecting, but also we need to ensure that we are maximizing the emunah, which I translate as loyalty, of those people who are already, if you like, in the fold. And I apologize for all these labels that sound judgmental, but I'm using them as a frame of reference for this discussion. I think there's definitely a really important need, and I look at the communities around us, for chizuk for those who are already in the fold, because they should not slide into mediocrity. They should always also be challenged to grow further and never be satisfied with where they are. And I think there's a great danger, and I think we see it in Melbourne with people saying, well, you know, I'm from enough, I've made it, and I don't need to go any further. And that is a mistake for them and for the Kehillah as a whole. But at the same time, as I said, as we all agree, there's that need to reach out to the less affiliated to start with. So I'm afraid, Saul, I accept the challenge of your question, even if I don't accept quite the exact premise. I accept the challenge, and the answer must be answered by each individual person and each individual organization, or even each individual shul. The need for what I'll call Kiruv Krovim and Kiruv Rechokim are both very great, and we must meet both of them as best as we can.
Okay, we're just going to do one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up if anyone has a question to ask.
Can I ask a question?
Oh.
There you go, you go.
Hannah, you're on, that's it.
Okay, thank you. I believe, honestly, as a parent of B'nai Akiva, what a wonderful job you're all doing. And I really, really mean that. And you've heard me say that before. But I think we in Orthodoxy have to learn how to be with each other. And that is Chabad has to really respect B'nai Akiva, respect Mizrahi. I think people outside and ourselves see how there's a little bit of, perhaps, there is a bit of competition here. And I think before we can do everything that you're asking, is that we really need to understand each other. Let me just put it like this. As a Sephardi person, we come from Baghdad. And, you know, I've known many people who've come through, and I've come through Chabad too. And I have been to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I do know what I'm talking about. Who say that they come home from school and they say, oh, I have to light a candle. We have to respect each other's traditions, each other's minhagim. And honestly, I've been in Melbourne now for 31 years. I will be in Yerushalayim by Pesach on Aliyah. But I just want to say, we need to understand each other and respect each other. As Orthodox people, whether we are from wherever we are from, Beit Talmud, wherever we are from, before we can really do this work together, because we are all in it together. We are not in competition with each other. I'm sorry, but I really needed to say that.
All good. Thank you for sharing. Kivi, do you want to, you had a question?
Yeah, that's, okay, thank you. My question, I guess, probably stems from thinking about the idea of intermarriage, because I guess it's the very common metric for, you know, we talk about, you know, our affiliation with Judaism and people, you know, losing their connection. And it's always obviously quite a scary statistic, you know, when you look at when they approach 50% or you know, 40%. But I guess I'm asking on what is the sell for someone that's totally unaffiliated? So I'm going to make the assumption that a fair proportion of people that are unaffiliated probably comes quite heavily down to a relationship with Hashem, and a belief in God's obviously becoming less and less popular. It's a generational thing. Youth are less connected to God, to religion, or, you know, Judaism and every other religion alike. So let's say you encounter someone that doesn't believe in God. They think religion's all a bit of a hoax, or, you know, it was created to give people meaning, but doesn't really stem from anything meaningful. It just doesn't really, it isn't anything but people wanting to create meaning, and there's not a real God. What do you tell them? Like, what case do you have if they think that religion is all just, you know, invented for no purpose?
This was the last question. This is the question we sort of like have our last 2 minutes summing up on. I don't think it's going to work like that, because it's quite a big question. The first thing to say, and I know I seem to be answering every question by rejecting the question itself. I'm afraid, Kiva, there is no single magic wand. There is no script And if every kiruv worker had the script that would answer your question, then the world will be very different. You touch on a huge problem that not just in the world of kiruv, but in the world of religion, and I even go beyond Judaism, God was dethroned quite emphatically, starting with the process of the so-called Enlightenment. And if you get to 50, 60 years ago, there was a huge revolution in people's thinking. Religion is now a minority interest. Certainly in many parts of the Western world, including Australia, I think the majority would say they are not religious of any sort. And the idea in particular of a religion telling people what they must and mustn't do is so antithetical to millennials and Generation Z that it's become a very, very, very hard sell. Now, let me answer it let me give you the best answer I can like this. I said earlier that I know my own strengths and my own weaknesses. What I try to do, and I pass no judgment on my success, is teach by teaching Torah. Perhaps because my own personal story, I became a Baal Teshuva because I was attracted by the profundity and the wisdom of Torah itself and the thrill of learning Torah. And that is what I try to share with others. And I'm well aware, very, very well aware, that for some people it works. For some people, that is what turns them on and answers your question. Because once they understand the profundity, the coherence, the logic of the system that we call Torah and the subsystem that we call halakha, for some people that answers the question and excites them and opens their eyes, as happened to me. But I'm also very, very aware that it doesn't work for everyone. Perhaps it doesn't even work for the majority. And for other people, you need lots of other ways of attracting people and finding ways to show them the beauty and the richness of Jewish life. And then the answer to your theological question comes later. And I think it might be appropriate at this point for me to hand over to Rabbi Mendy, who I'm sure works very hard on teaching Torah, but like other Chabadniks, he's probably very good at other ways of getting people connected as well. How would you answer Kiwi's question?
So first, I don't know if Hannah's still there, I can't see her, but I wanted to say that I agree with you 100% that we do need to respect each other. There's no question. I don't know if any Chabad Rabbi will tell you that we don't need to respect. If it translates of an action is translated into not, I'm not the spokesman for all Chabad. I'll say from my own self, I hope that the way I behave is a way of showing respect. And I also want to say that I'm a proud descendant of Iraqi Jews too. My great-grandmother born in Burma, but her parents came from Iraq. So I'm definitely agree that many traditions and differ from Chabad traditions, but it comes down to the ideology that we have of that by letting a child, if the parents aren't doing Shabbos, are not having Shabbos at home, and the child brings home a candle and they light the candle, then out of respect, the parents turn off the TV for the 10 minutes, 20 minutes of the candle lighting ceremony. Maybe they'll keep the TV off for an hour, and then maybe they'll introduce a Kiddush cup later on. And it's the idea of a small planting a seed, which will snowball into something in the future.
Could I just come in? Sorry. So
Sure.
Perhaps in the interest of spicing up this conversation. I understand exactly what Hannah was saying. And I have to say, Mendy, just between the 39 of us, I think there are some times when Chabad fails to distinguish between Chabad minhagim and normative minhagim. And girls lighting candles is one of those. It is not a normative minhag, although it does find some sources outside Chabad, but it's not a normative minhag. And there are many times when Chabad, and this is an example of many, say, this is what you should do, as if it's in the Shulchan Aruch, when it's not. There are other examples as well. And I think some shluchim make that mistake of not distinguishing and not clearly explaining the difference between Chabad minhagim and normative halachic Judaism.
For sure. And again, the reason why lighting Shabbos candles for children was instituted was to bring the light into the house through the children, and the parents interacting with the Shabbos candle is through the child, not because it's from them. Because the child wants to do it, then the family will accept it and get involved. I don't think anyone will say it's a mitzvah for children to light candles, but it's a way for the family to engage with Shabbos. Again, so 100% agree. We try to be respectful of everyone's minhagim and the 10 mitzvahim of the Rabbi were calculated of how to best engage with the community. And that goes back to Saul's question of finding what your things should be that you're going to focus on. But I'll just try to address Kivi's points. Well, the first one is the fact that you're able to engage with somebody. It means they're not indifferent. It means they care. They have a question, or they want to know. They want to discuss it, and you're already halfway there. You found someone that maybe they're not going to marry Jewish at this point, but they question it. They want to know, why is it so important that I should marry someone Jewish? Why is it important that there's a religion that we need to be part of? Why is it? So once you have the questioner, you can already engage with them. You can bring them to your local rabbi or rebbitzin, wherever it is, that you can have those discussions and try to pique their interest. The problem today is a lot of people just couldn't care less. They're indifferent. There's no, the apathy is one of the biggest challenges that we have. So I think it's great if someone's engaging with you and asking you those questions. It means they have an interest. It does bother them. If it bothers them, it means there's potential to work with them and to help show them. My answer's been answering 3 people. I felt like I've made a complete circle, but just to finish on this point is that we're trying to plant seeds. We're not trying to make massive change in people. A mitzvah, I would say the biggest difference between Chabad and any other organization, and I've worked with other organizations. I spent time with NCSY and on the West Coast. I met with Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg, and we had a discussion about the difference between NCSY, which is the modern Orthodox movement in North America, and the difference between that and Chabad. And one strong difference is in NCSY, the derech, the way that they engage with students, is first convince the student to wear tzitzis, the boy. Get the boy to wear tzitzis. And then the next step is send him to yeshiva. And then the tefillin, all that will come later on. With Chabad, we'll stand on the street, we'll ask, are you Jewish? We'll put tefillin, we'll say goodbye, and we'll never see the person again in our lifetime. Very possibly. And it's a very, very different way of looking at things. And the reason why it's so different is because it comes back to Chassidus, it comes back to the Baal Shem Tov, that every single seed, every single action or interaction that we have, one small mitzvah, we might never know the difference or the change that it makes. But mitzvah gereris mitzvah, one mitzvah will bring another mitzvah. Maybe the next time they'll put tefillin is in another place. Maybe the next time they'll do another mitzvah. You know, you don't know that one interaction, how that changes. There was a beautiful post on Facebook last night from someone who saw Rabbi Mati Librov outside Hamerkaz shul blowing shofar for people. And this woman writes that she hasn't shed tears over Judaism in so many years, but seeing the rabbi stand there all day and have people walk past and blow shofar for them, to her that was moving, that was beautiful. So we don't know. Rabbi Mati might have stood outside and only one person come the whole day, but he doesn't know what this woman, how it affected this woman so much by that experience. And one other point, the difference of Chabad, and this is not on Bnei Akiva, this is more on people who are more strict on these things. There was once a rabbi putting tefillin on a Jew in an airport, and a chassid comes along and he says, did the guy wash negovasa today? How do you know what this guy, what he did before? You put tefillin on him, he could be impure, you don't know what's going on. So the rabbi asked him, when this guy is driving down the street on Shabbos, are you screaming at him Shabbos? Are you screaming at him? You're so worried that he's breaking Shabbos, but you don't care about positively affecting his life. Negatively, you're happy to scream Shabbos. What are you trying to achieve by screaming Shabbos? You're trying to tell him off? So we try to do it out of love. As Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says, after the Hitler, the Nazis, Yimach Shmam, searched out every Jew out of hate, and the Lubavitcher Rabbi inspired his students to find every Jew out of love. And that's what we try to do.
Thank you so much to both of you. We're going to give you the chance to say one final sentence, and we are over time, so we're going to keep it to the one sentence of your message on education, our role as Madrichim, anything that you would like to leave the audience with tonight. Rabbi Kennard, if you want to start.
Okay, I'll try one sentence, but all I'll do is have several clauses linked by semicolons. It's still one sentence. Kiruv is an obligation. It's very important. It is done in lots of different ways. If I could say there is a best way, it would be by personal example and examples of integrity, commitment, and caring and Ahavas Yisrael.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say that all the Madjuchim from Bnei Akiva that I've met at university have been definitely examples on campus of living examples of being a Jew. You don't know what it means to walk on campus with a yarmulke, or walk on campus dressed modestly, or however you behave to make a bracha on food. And students, for some of them, this is the first Jew they're meeting, first religious Jew they're meeting, you don't know the effects that you're having on campus. Be good role models, continue doing what you're doing, and never give up an opportunity to help another Jew. And it's a pleasure to know the ones that I know, and it's, God willing, going to be even bigger pleasure to know the rest of you. Anyway, thank you so much, and wish you Gemar Chasima Tova.
Thank you both.
Everyone involved in arranging this panel. It's certainly been a pleasure for me, and I'm sure for Mendy, and I hope it's been of some illumination to everyone else.
Thank you so much on behalf of Bnei Akiva and everyone who's joined the panel tonight. I think you've both given us a lot to think about and a lot of insight leading into this next year. So thank you for spending your last hour before curfew with us, and wish everyone an easy and meaningful fast next week, and a Shana Tova U'Metoka. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.